everybody, um, and welcome to the show this week. That's kind of what I want to say. This week I've been working on a couple interesting things. I want to share the story with you. Some stuff that's happened. Um, I do some group coaching for some other people they hired me to do for their group. Right? Talk about money, talk about how it impacts their businesses, and how changing your mindset and changing kind of some of the way you kind of look at. This conversation was how they're looking at their numbers in their business, um, and how that kind of really leads to um, growth within their business or not growth. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs overall, not just this group, but a lot of different ones who don't even look at their numbers. Um, when I was looking at, I was doing an exercise with them where I created this sheet for them, and they are like filling it out, basically looking at like their it's similar like time cost analysis that I created. Because that's one problem we have with businesses, we don't ever know like really how much time are we putting in and what's that worth, and like does it fit within like our billable hours. So that's the conversation that came up, and we started talking. Through this process, um, it kind of dawned on me, right? My people I talk to are my greatest teachers. Like I learn the most. And as I've been talking a lot about growth to this group, we've been working a lot on the attitude of growth. Um, so they're doing this thing, and I'm responding to the sheet. So I'm like, hey, go fill out the sheet, get it all in, and then I'll respond and create a video for each of you. And it's interesting what has come up out of this process. And for us, mostly as humans, as we go through things, right? And that's being really transparent with our numbers. And let me explain what I mean by that, because all of them put down what they're making, and it's amazing, right? They have billable hours, they do this stuff, and it reminds me of a client I had a while ago where it was the same thing. Like I pushed her to start looking at her numbers, like weekly, right? What's your income? What's your outgo? What's going on? And in the beginning, it can be a really scary process because numbers really trigger us. It's the hardest part about business and life because we've never been conditioned or taught that looking at our numbers are okay, right? At the dinner table, people never talk about money. It kind of ends up in the same bucket as religion and politics, right? Nobody ever talks about it. We're not allowed, right? Even in the corporate world, it's really kind of taboo to talk about how much you make because everybody's negotiated their wage and nobody wants to know. And there's been a couple places where I've worked where people are like, it's just like that conversation of how much you make, and it's like you really don't talk about it. It's like the back closet kind of conversations. um, and people in corporate make it feel like, oh, it's so everybody can still be I don't know, I've heard so many excuses like we don't want to know each other because then somebody's going to feel bad if they're not making as much. I'm like, that's their problem. They can negotiate what they're making, right? If they're there for who knows how many years, you got to negotiate. Like you got to be present with what you're making. It's an important part. But talking about those numbers, right back to that, talking about the numbers. So people who exit corporate and come to entrepreneurship, start their own businesses, they still bring these bad habits of not talking about their numbers. Well, as a business owner, that's a problem, right? If we don't know what our numbers are, if we like most of us just look at our revenue, hey, how much am I making? How much am I billing my clients? You know, it's like packages or whatever, and this is how much money I make each month. But then see what happens. Here's where the transparency part comes in, because we're not completely accurate and transparent with what's going out. So we're bringing all this money, we're struggling, and we're going through, but at the same time we like feel this weight on our shoulders. And I've heard it before. I've heard it from people who are making like $400,000-$500,000 a year in their business. And they tell me, they say, Joe, I make all this money in my business, yet I still feel like I'm on a budget of a college kid. They're still just scraping by. Like, I'm making all this money, my expenses aren't high, but I still feel like I'm not making anything. Right? So there's emotional pressure, like weight on our shoulders, and we struggle and we roll around and we're like, why are we not making more? Well, my answer to that is we're not being completely transparent with our expenses and how much it's actually costing us to do business. Because we don't want to look at that. We're scared that like our outgo might exceed our income. And then what does that mean? Does it mean we're bad owners? Does it mean we're spending too much? So we have a hard time looking at that side. And the problem is when we look at the attitude of growth, you know, if you go back and watch some of my older growth videos, the concept really is, it's like we're a plant in like a little planter. And the attitude of growth is saying, hey, we're going to fill out like our measure of creation in the space where we've created. And then when we get bigger, like a plant, right? If you have never repotted plants, it's really cool to watch because you know when they're ready, because they'll start to kind of die even if you know they look healthy. And you'll see them dying. You give them water and feed and change out the soil. But what happens is the roots start to pull at the bottom and have nowhere to go. So you lift them up, put them in a new one. However, that feels like a scary moment, right? Because and us as humans, as we up level our businesses, as we up level our space, as we start to make more money, as we start to expand, it feels scary because there's a little bit of a void and we're not sure if we can quite fill that space. The other problem is we haven't accounted for everything. So now as we're being moved and as we're expanding into a bigger space, as we're making more money, we're not quite sure if we can keep up with it. Because guess what? Life has shown us that every time we make more money, we spend more. That's a little true. The bigger truth there is we're already spending it. We're just more aware of it because we have more money coming in. So my challenge to you guys this week is, what are the real expenses in your businesses? Like, and I'm being honest, like what part of, like, so back to this group, right? We do like all these things and I'm like, okay, put your expenses down, put your income down, and there's some formulas I have in this sheet that kind of calculate out some things for them, right? And it comes down to be like, hey, how much is like my true, like how much am I like billing versus how much am I actually making? And some of them were like almost exactly the same. And I'm like, well, it makes it hard to like keep going because guess what you missed? Like every single one of them, of all the ones I did. Okay, this is kind of, I laughed because I'm like, you guys missed like a lot of stuff. The one thing that I saw right away that they all missed was they're not accounting for, hey, where's my office space? Is it at home? That's a cost to me as a business. That should be an expense. Why are you not putting that down? Right? We're still not thinking like business owners because we don't want to look at those expenses. We're looking like, hey, what's exactly going out? Or I'm already paying that, so it's not important. But it's really important because that emotional weight, back to the emotional parts, because that's the biggest problem with us making more money, is that emotional weight we're carrying makes it feel heavy. That's why when we try to make $100,000 a year, right? So we were still trying to make that space. We try to make our next 100,000. We try to make 500,000. It feels so heavy because our expenses aren't true on our sheets, because we're scared, and mostly probably just ashamed to put them all down. We're like, I can't believe all that's that, because most of the time, our true expenses exceed our income. And that doesn't feel good. Just want you to sit with that for a second. So, if we look at the attitude of growth, part of growing is being completely transparent with ourselves, right? We don't have to be transparent with everybody, but being completely transparent with ourselves and where we're at and what it actually costs us to do business. Because guess what? If we can be transparent with ourselves, we release the emotional weight of those unknowns that we already really know about because we're smart, we're intuitive people. We have these intuitions, right? These instincts. We already know about those. So let's just be honest with ourselves and put it on paper. And when we do that, then it's going to be much easier to see what we have to do to make up for the difference and continue to grow our business instead of being held back by the unknowns or the things we know about but don't want to call out. It takes a lot of mental gymnastics to continue to like push that away. It's very freeing to just put it down. It's painful. Like there's a lot of emotions that will come up. I'll promise you that. But when we do that, we'll grow faster in our businesses. As human beings, we like transparency. We really do. We try to brush that aside and then try to like hold that in the closet. It's like we're holding the closet door shut while we're trying to like move over here and do some stuff. Right? As we're trying to do work and build. And it's like, just let it out. Be transparent with yourself. Again, this isn't for anybody else, but be transparent with yourself. Understand what your real expenses are. Understand what that other side of the coin is, because we're always focused on making more money and growing, but we're never really focused on what are the expenses and what's the other side of that formula. So this week I'm going to challenge you. Look at that. Really look at that. Do some soul searching and be like, hey, what am I really missing in my expenses? Because then we can say, okay, cool. Here's like, where you need to go next as far as income goes. You need to change up what you're offering. Do you need more people? Do you need what does that look like? And in the long term, you know what that's going to look like when you continue to grow and you have to change out processes within your company. You might have to hire people at some point, right? Now we're starting to become more clear on what it is that we need to move forward. So don't be scared. It's not going to kill you. And if you need support, you know where to find me. Till next week. See you guys.